Hello. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Better Business, Better Society seminar from Aalto University School of Business. We're running this seminar on extreme corona safety, so we're doing it entirely remotely this time. We do have a very interesting panel to look forward to. Today's topic is being pragmatic about sustainability, and our assistant professor Patrick Schulis will be running the discussion. But before we go there, we follow the normal protocol, and I'll go over some of the things that are going on at Aalto University School of Business. I don't see the slides right now, but I hope they're moving forward. So what I was going to highlight today is our school's strategy, and most importantly, what we're doing on the educational side. There are the slides too. Thank you. So we have been talking in some of the earlier seminars about the school strategy that we adopted as of January 1st, and one of the 4 key strategic initiatives that we are addressing at the School of Business is educational renewal, and life-wide learning being part of that. So I'll tell you just briefly what we're doing on that area now. We can move to the next slide, please. So we are doing extremely well on research, and we are I would say world-renowned for our research output, and we are working to be even more attractive on the global scale on our educational offerings, and as part of that, we are going over our teaching portfolio or program portfolio, and thinking about how we would be more attractive to the global audience there. So we're looking for things that would be, first of all, multidisciplinary, to take advantage of Aalto strengths beyond just that the offerings that are offered within the School of Business. Obviously, the heart of our programs is at the School of Business, so we're not giving away our strengths that we have. We're looking at hybrid offerings. Obviously, the COVID time has been great for us in terms of learning new tools and how to, we're going to be looking into how we can combine these hybrid tools to our online, to our live offerings on campus. We can move one more step here, please. So here's actually our program portfolio, and you see here parts of what's old or existing and parts of what's new and in planning. So our program portfolio at the bachelor level is quite straightforward. We have a large bachelor program where students can specialize to one of the business disciplines through their studies. We have a specific bachelor program in economics that has been in existence only for a couple of years thus far, and that is taught in English. Another program at the bachelor level that is completely taught in English is our international business program on our Mikkeli campus. At the master's level, we have a mix of programs, going from the traditional programs such as accounting, finance, economics, marketing, and mixing that with more interdisciplinary offerings that are partly very much what Aalto is all about. And in order to renew this portfolio and make it more attractive, as I said, we do have 3 proposals that are currently going through planning phase. And the goal of all these three boxes in green is that they would be open for applications and start in 2022. So we're going at a pretty good pace. There's managing people and developing organizations. There's strategic management in a changing world, and then there's business analytics. And like I said, we've been developing these ideas to take advantage of the strengths that we have within our faculty and listening to the feedback that we hear from the society. We actually had an aalto-wide teaching evaluation exercise completed last fall. And part of that exercise, we heard feedback from both society and from our important stakeholders, and also there was an international panel. And part of this revision work on our portfolio is based on the feedback that we have received from those and other sources. We're obviously not growing our portfolio so large that it would become manageable and too fractured. So there are also programs, existing programs that have been or are being discontinued, and those would be the boxes in the red. And so again, what we are doing is we're doing some slight alignments here to make ourselves more attractive on the global scale. But I don't think I'm going to keep you any longer. You came here to hear about the sustainability topic, so I will pass over to Patrick, and Patrick can go ahead and introduce the panelists and get the show on the road. Please, Patrick.
Thank you, Timo. Thanks for the overview of what's going on at the school, and thank you as well for the opportunity to lead today's session. Also, a very big thank you to the three panelists who've joined us today, and whom I will introduce in a few moments. And so right off the bat, just to cover the structure that we're going to go through here, today's seminar, we're going to keep it to an hour, so we'll aim to end by 6 o'clock, not an hour and a half, because I realize I'm probably the only thing standing between you and an Easter weekend, so we'll make sure we keep it on the shorter end. The plan here is I'll give about a 10-minute introduction to the topic we're going to cover today. And then we'll move to the panel for about 30 minutes and finally spend the rest of our time answering some questions from the audience. I believe you should have had a link to that when you signed up for how to ask questions. So, but with the practicalities out of the way, let's get to today's session. So to start with, let me introduce myself. My name's Patrick Schulist, and as actually, if it would be possible to put the slides up, that would be awesome, just so we can see the title of the session. So my name's Patrick Schulist, and as can be seen from my job title, I'm an assistant professor of sustainability in business. That means I spend a lot of time thinking about sustainability. I teach 3 sustainability courses. I'm actually leading the development of one of those new programs that Timo just mentioned, the Strategic Management in a Changing World program, which incorporates sustainability rather substantially into it. It's one of the main reasons why the world is changing. And I also do a number of different things related to research, mostly related to international development, entrepreneurship, and poverty alleviation in Africa, mostly Ghana and Tanzania. And so while this introduction may make it sound like I'm sort of a granola munching, tie-dye wearing hippie, my approach to sustainability is in fact a very pragmatic one. And so hence the topic of today's session, which is being pragmatic about sustainability. And as we go through this session, we'll unpack what I mean by pragmatism. But for now, all I really want to highlight about that word is that it means balancing things. It's about not going to one extreme or the other, and it's about finding balance and compromise in the decisions we make. So if you wouldn't mind putting the slides back up and going forward one, I'm just going to briefly let the audience know who our panelists are before I get into the rest of my introduction. And so, like I mentioned, I'm gonna give a brief introduction to this topic, and then we're gonna go to a panel. And just so you know the expertise that's coming your way, we have 3 people joining us today. So first, Ulla Heinonen, who is Managing Director at Gaia Consulting. Anna-Reetta Lumme-Timonen, who's Investment Director at Solidium. And then finally, also Riikka Heikinheimo, who's a director at the Confederation of Finnish Industries, or EKO. Hopefully I did all right on my Finnish pronunciation there. And so next slide, please. We could have the next slide. Thank you. And so what I want to start with talking about is something that's very well known. There's a dire pressing need for action on sustainability. And we can see this from even a casual perusing of news headlines, some of which I've put in this slide here. And, just to briefly recap some of what we know that from an environmental standpoint, there's a vast scientific consensus that we're acting unsustainably and that we simply need to stop treating the world as if it were infinite, because the world will give up on us. And there's only so much nature out there. From a social and societal standpoint, the COVID crisis has also made very clear the underlying discrimination, poverty, and inequality that pervades society, and it's made it harder to ignore. And so it's also now recognized that these factors together sort of have the potential to undercut the stability of our democratic institutions, which is really not good for the fabric of society. And so, as I mentioned, though, these things aren't new. My goal here isn't to try to convince you that sustainability is a problem and we should care more about the environment or society. The evidence is there, and many others have spoken about this at length. And so instead, this session is going to just sort of take as a given that these problems are known to be there and are known to be problematic. Next slide, please. And so with that said, if I'm not going to try to convince you about the importance of sustainability, what are we going to discuss then? And why have I bothered to mention pragmatism before? Well, what I want to do with this seminar is have a frank, honest, and open discussion about sustainability transitions in a market-based society. And what underpins this focus is that once we've recognized the need for sustainability, what I got at on the previous slide, we can't simply snap our fingers and make sustainability happen. It's not as if we just need to know that sustainability is an issue and bam, it's fixed somehow. It's not that simple. And so instead, we really need to recognize that these transitions to a more sustainable world, they are hard, and that hard questions have to be asked and hard questions have to be answered. And it's against that background that I personally grow really frustrated with much of the rhetoric around sustainability, because it tends to say something along the lines of sustainability is important, and so companies have to address this need, and they'll do it naturally. I don't disagree with this point that business and the business community needs to address sustainability. I want to see companies and countries be more sustainable. Yet, I think, and again, getting back at the undertone of pragmatism, focusing only on the need for sustainability, we overlook some of the very difficult realities that are at play. Next slide, please. Thank you. And the first reality, I'm going to mention 2 sets of them, is just that sustainability there's trade-offs involved. Not everything's a win-win. And here on this slide, you can see a Venn diagram, which you've probably seen many different iterations of. And essentially what that lays out is that when it comes to society, the environment, and the economy, it's only by balancing those things that we can be sustainable. And that's great. And we should aim for that middle part of this diagram and try to be sustainable and balance all those things. But we also have to recognize that it's not so simple as getting there is always a win-win. I will always be better off economically, environmentally, and socially by doing this. So we have to admit that perhaps to be more environmentally sustainable, we might have to sacrifice some profitability, especially in the short term. We might also have to recognize that to be economically viable as a company, that we might have to pay our workers less than would be optimal and thus contribute to issues related to inequality and poverty. Those trade-offs are at play, and we can't just ignore them because they're inconvenient and not nice to talk about. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next point on that slide. Thanks. And so the second reality to get at, which is interwoven with the first, is that sustainability is hard. And the main reason for this is there's so much inertia behind the system. And what I mean by inertia is that it's not as if we're dealing with some small system. Instead, like when we talk about the market-based economy that our society is involved with, there's hundreds of millions and billions of people around the world all making decisions about what they want to buy and what they want to do, where they want to work, those types of things. There's also millions of companies that play in this system. And depending on the level we might look at, there's either dozens, hundreds, or thousands of governments working in this system as well. And what that means is that there's just like, because so many people are making decisions independently, it's not like things can change really quickly. It's sort of like, and this is an imperfect analogy, but when you're skiing, cross-country skiing, going downhill and you got your skis in the track, it's really easy to go the direction those tracks are taking you. And that's sort of like the system in which we operate. But to change that direction takes a lot of effort and a lot of time because that's not easy. Next point, please. And so in unpacking this fact that sustainability is hard, one thing to just make really clear is the fact that companies still need to make money. And this is interwoven with what I mentioned on the previous slide, which is that not everything is a win-win. It can often be hard and expensive to make sustainability transitions. And yet, again, just the reality is companies still need to make money because creditors and investors expect it. We also need money to fund future expansions. And ultimately, this gets us to a point of saying, like, well, we could be the world's most sustainable company, but if you don't make enough money, you go out of business and you haven't done anybody any good. Next point, please. And to get at why this is hard, here's just a short list of factors that one could consider. And I'll use an example to highlight this. So a company like PepsiCo, which is a very diversified company, you probably know them best from Pepsi drinks, but they're into many different lines of business. And they, or their CEO at the time, about a decade and a half ago, recognized that the world was changing and they couldn't just continue to sell their traditional unhealthy foods, and a restructuring and reorientation of that company was started. Yet a decade and a half later, that's still incomplete. And part of the reason for that is just when you have a company with hundreds of thousands of employees, very complex supply chains, and customers that expect certain things, it's hard to change that. And you can't just, again, flip a switch and now you're a completely different company. You have all this inertia behind what you're doing. Next slide, please. And I'm getting towards the end of my part here. And so this finally brings us back to the point of this seminar, and that we're going to talk about pragmatism and about the need to balance what needs to be done with what can actually be done. And what we're going to focus the discussion on is trying to understand what that middle ground, where that pragmatism exists. Because, in my opinion, you can't just go to one extreme or the other. You can't just say, sustainability is hard, and so we're not going to do anything about it because it's risky. We might risk the business. Well, it's hard, but at the same time, we know that the world is changing. And if we don't adjust to this new sustainable reality, we're probably going to be a less viable business in a couple of years. On the other hand, though, we can't go to the other extreme and simply say, well, sustainability is really important, so who cares how much it costs, right? Like, then we become non-viable as a company. It's really about finding that middle ground and effectively operating there. And that's hard to do ultimately. Next slide, please. And so just before moving to introduce the panelists or give them an opportunity to speak, let me just make a couple notes on scope here. So the first one is that when I'm talking about sustainability here, or when we will talk about sustainability, I mean to capture that broadly. So we're not just talking about this with relation to climate change or pollution, but also social issues such as poverty, inequality, racial justice. Those are all also important because I'd argue the same broad patterns apply there. The second thing is we're going to focus on business here. Certainly, there's a very important public policy question interwoven with this, but as we know, public policy is a little unpredictable at times, and so let's just focus on within the bounds of current public policy. What is the latitude that business has, and what can business do pragmatically to push forward sustainability concerns? Next slide, please. Thank you. And so we're going to head back to our panelists now. I've spoken quite enough, and they have much more experience than I do, and so let's rely on their voices. So the first, we're going to start off with the same question for all of our panelists. Basically, I'd just like you to introduce some of your own experience, both in business and as was related to sustainability, and then just some of your opening thoughts or remarks on what I've just spent 10 minutes talking about. And so we will start with Ulla Heinonen, who, as I mentioned, is a managing director at Gaia Capital. Ulla, first off, thank you very much for joining us, and please let us know a little bit more about yourself as well as your opinions on this.
Yes, thank you. Hello, everybody. Very nice to be here. Just a few words about me first. My name is Ulla Heinonen, and I'm from Gaia Consulting, which is a business consulting company for sustainable business. And we are working with the public and private sector with this issue, how to make business sustainable and how to find the business advantages from it. And my background is in this business development and sustainability around 20 years, from the research, further education, and from the consultancy point of view. I've worked with a lot of various industries and topics in the public and private sector. About this pragmatics of sustainability and business, to be honest, I don't see it so divide. I see it as a kind of there has been a great transformation during the last 5 years, and the business is changing. There, as you mentioned, Patrick, there is a great change, and we have a lot of information about the realities, the boundaries that the planet is putting to us, and also the kind of the reality that we are facing, and all the stakeholder opinions that what we need to include into the business. And I think nowadays many of the companies sees that it's not about business and sustainability, it's about how to make business by sustainability. So it's really, I can see that there is an integration happening. And then when you focus on the relevant issues about what is material of the sustainability for this business, this industry, this value chain, then we are in the kind of points where we can create positive things through business sustainability. But as mentioned, it's not an easy task. It's a transformation, and you mentioned the Pepsi Cola or Pepsi company. Hey, big ships, they don't turn in the minute. So as we just learned last week, so it takes time, and it's a transformation, great transformation. It needs a lot of change management. But I would say that there has been a great change already.
Thank you. And thank you for your thoughts. We'll certainly come back to this question of how fast can that change happen then. So moving to our next panelist, I'd like to invite Anna-Reetta Lumme-Timonen. who's the investment director at Solidium. And for those of you who don't know, Solidium is, well, I will let you introduce Solidium because you will probably do a much more effective job of it than I will. But and then it's less me talking, more you talking. It's just better for everybody. So I'll pass it over to you. Thank you with the same introductory question.
Thank you, Patrick, and thank you for the Aalto alumni for being invited to this great and interesting seminar series. I'm very happy to attend this also as an Aalto alumni myself, with a Master of Science in Engineering background and later in doctorate in the business strategy, so very much the same area where Patrick works now. In my job, I work as an investment director at Solidium, which is the holding company fully owned by the state of Finland. Our mission is to increase the value of our holdings, minority holdings in companies that the state has deemed as not strategic as such, but our main target is really to increase the wealth and prosperity for all Finns by managing that portfolio as an active and long-term owner. Since the beginning of Solidium's operations some 12 years ago, sustainability and responsible ownership has been one of the cornerstones of our operations. We believe that managing sustainability well is a prerequisite for value creation, especially for not only the protecting value, but also in the form of opportunities to enhance value creation. We have an integrated approach, which means that all the business, our analysts and our investment directors, the investment teams integrate themselves, the sustainability views to the very other analysis and management that we do on our holdings on a regular basis, compare with their peers, and then the outcomes and conclusions are taken into the normal dialogue that Solidium has with its minority holdings. I have been since the inception of Solidium's corporate responsibility work. I have been in charge of developing it and taking it forward on top of my job as an investment director, and also Solidium has been throughout the years an active member in FinSIF, the Sustainable Investment Organization. Then coming to the actual your question, Patrick, I think I sound like echoing what very much like what Ulla already said. I would even extend the time period I was thinking to say to start with. Actually, in the past 10 years, I think we've seen in a great transformation already from sustainability and corporate responsibility being a very general overall topic to some thematic topics. We started to talk about supply chain management, and then environmental issues, CO2 more recently, and now we see the big wave of biodiversity coming into the corporate agendas as well, and a lot has changed. So I think I would be quite optimistic to start with, and as you said, Patrick, we think that we are heading big challenges, but that has been the field of sustainability management all the way through. We always have new challenges, and then we somehow then aim to, and I believe, succeed in solving them. What is really important for businesses, though, is to understand the materiality, and here again, I think Ulla and I are on the very same lines. What it means that you really have to understand what is core for your business, and your stakeholders. Make a good sustainability program, focus on that, keep the KPIs, and very importantly, lead and manage the change, lead through the organization. And it means sometimes that you need to make compromises. Long-term gains may need short-term pains, and they don't always go together. But maybe that's what I say at this point of time, and leave the floor for the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for your good opening thoughts here. We'll again come back to this question of short-term pain, long-term gain when, really trying to understand how fast can that transition happen, because that's a challenging question to answer. But finally, to introduce more formally our third panelist, Riikka Heikinheimo, who's the director at the Confederation of Finnish Industries. I will not try to pronounce the full Finnish name of that, EK. I will just go with the short form. But please let us know a little bit about yourself, some of your expertise, as well as just your opening thoughts on how to balance, the realities of sustainability with the need for sustainability.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you, and hello, everyone, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to be here today with you. So I'm Riikka Heikinheimo, and I work at the Confederation of Finnish Industries. EK is fine. I think we are mostly known by that name. I work there as a director, and I'm responsible for skills, competencies, innovation, and digitalization. And those are the trends that actually affect a lot Finnish industry. If you don't know EK, maybe I very briefly say that we cover roughly 70% of business life in Finland, and roughly 70% of you are employed by companies who are our members. So that's the area where we operate. So we cover very many different industrial fields from service sector to harder basic industry. My relationship with sustainability is rather long, in the sense that I used to work at Tekes, which is the funding agency for innovations, and already in early 2000 there were technology programs at that time that were developing the technologies that are needed in order to become sustainable in your business. And later on, I worked at the Academy of Finland, so I know pretty well the research activities that are taking place in Finland in this area and also in other areas. And then at Confederation of Finnish Industries, during the past 6 years, I've seen the increase in Finnish companies in their R&D and I activities, and I've seen how this carbon neutrality solutions for climate change, how they have entered to the agendas of more and more companies. And I see how serious companies are about these issues. And during the last 12 months, I've had a chance to be one of the supporting persons for a program or a project which we call Digital Game Changers, which is a group of Finnish front-runner companies who have actually, due to Corona crisis, put their thoughts together and looked at the future. How do they see the future, and which are the areas where they want to develop their activities further? And this green and digital transition is very much in the core of many companies. And then what you mentioned, Patrick, in your presentation or in your introduction, I very much agree with you. But, and I agree, especially with need to be pragmatic about sustainability. And what concerns me is that I see that the companies are facing skill caps. They are really lacking of skilled people to be employed. And that's why I started to talk about this issue to education providers. And if that is not taken in a pragmatic way, then we may end up in a situation where we are educating people not in a balanced way, because I genuinely believe that we can really become sustainable only when it is a real issue of companies. So it has to be business. And this is what worries me. And this is why we've had some discussions with you, Patrick, earlier on, and I have very much encouraged you to do what you are doing at the moment. So maybe this at this point.
Awesome. Well, thank you. So we'll move now to more of a conversational panel style. I will also remind the audience that in your invitation, you should have had a link to ask questions. I'll see those and relay them to the audience, or not to the audience, to our speakers. But yeah, let's move more towards the informal side now. And, there's so many great thoughts to pick up on here. And one of the ones that I think especially got mentioned in our first two panelists, and we'll come back to the skills gap part at the end, because that's a key part of, figuring out some of the solutions to how we better balance this pragmatism. But my question is, how fast should this transition be? Because, we can certainly speak about the fact that things are moving in the right direction, but then at the same time, we keep hearing these really doomsday-ish things related to the environment about we need to hit carbon neutrality by such and such a date, or else we'll hit a tipping point and then we end up in a worse situation. And so I guess my question is how fast should we be trying to do this? Because there has to be a balance there.
Can I?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I would say that it's never, as Anna-Reetta said, it's a path, it's a transformation. There will always be something else that we kind of ignore now, or we don't realize it. And in the sustainability, and when we are using the resources of natural, we will always head up new things. But I would say that if we are focusing on the climate, we have certain issues and we have, say, certain time limits, and there we don't have much time. We have close 10 years time. And in that way, the transformation from that perspective has to be rather fast. But as mentioned, in transformation of companies, you cannot transform the business snap like this. There has to be there's always this legacy core business that has to be running, to be able to keep investments going and get the cash flow ongoing. And then on top of that, you can do the transformation. But what I'm always talking about is that it has to be, there is a different kind of issues, the compliance issues, which is something that you just have to do. Those are the kind of a basic sustainability things that you have a social right to work as a company. But then when you're talking about the business, what are the advantages? What are the kind of issues? Many companies are now understanding that their business creates an impact. They create a handprint that they can make, for instance, climate change adaptation and mitigation possible. So that's the transformation I'm talking about. The compliance, I would say that there's always new things that comes up, and these are investments for the future, and those are just the investment that has to be done. But then there is the other side of the coin, is how to create business from the needs that sustainability brings. And this is about the business transformation, which you have to run parallelly. You have to run the legacy business, and then you have to build these kind of a must-win battles that you create new business, and all of that way transform the business. So I would say that there is no time limit. There is different deadlines for different things. But I would say, as Anna-Reetta mentioned, the biodiversity, that's the new issue, just heading, and it's as climate change, and it's related to climate change. And that's a topic that we need to address quite fast as well. But then after biodiversity, we will figure out something else, what we have been doing in this planet, and then we will have new issues coming. So I would say that, as mentioned, I've been working with this issue 20 years. I hope that I will be working for the next 40 at least. And there is always new things coming up.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, Anna-Reetta.
Okay, thank you. I think there are three points I want to take up. One is, of course, the difference between big corporates and then medium-sized and smaller companies, and on the resources and capabilities that are available. I think at least in Finland, many of the big, our blue chip companies are doing really a fantastic job on many aspects, with their sustainability programs being really well thought through, with focus, targets, measures and competencies quite well in place. But of course, when talking about the smaller, medium-sized or even smaller businesses, I think I can agree with Riikka that it's easy to see that the lack of time, resourcing, and maybe skills comes into more in question in there. Indeed, I heard the other day, earlier this week, results of a survey made by FIBS, the Finnish Business and Society, or regarding biodiversity, and I think out of the 1,000 companies that had participated in the survey, so it was just some odd ones, less than couple of percent, that even mentioned that biodiversity was yet on their agendas, and they were mainly medium-sized and smaller businesses. So there is a big difference, I think, which we need to recognize. The other is then it comes to differences between industries, and there we deal also with industrial facts. We did in Solidium last year, we carried out a new climate ambition comparison study between the Solidium holdings and their respective peers. And what we learned, among other things, is that there are industries which are really well advanced, like the forest industry in climate issues, and then there are some others which in which the big transition is still to be made. For example, in carbon steel, we, the mankind, we need to invent a new way of doing steel in order to avoid the big CO2 emissions in the future, and that's a technical fact. But I think there are good developments on that front going on as well. But still, we need to acknowledge the differences when you ask that how fast the transition can be. And then a key point is that we need to focus on things that can be measured. In the climate area, there already is a way, and the science-based targets provides a very good and concrete tool, and I cherish that. But when it comes to biodiversity, there still is no agreed, uniform, standardized way of measuring, nor then leading. And I think that will be a very interesting and important discussion for the years to come.
Thank you. And yes, Riikka.
Yeah. If I may add to this, how fast? I think it's very, very difficult to say how fast, but I think the point is that you have to be moving on all the time. And I take one example. If we think about the recovery funds that we have available in EU, for example, from this year through next 3, 4, 5 years, those companies who actually have something to offer in this digital green area, they are in very, very good position market-wise, because there's a huge demand for these solutions in energy sector, in transport sector, in maritime sector, in all sectors throughout the Europe, and of course also globally. So those who have been front-runner companies and who have developed already their technologies and offerings so that they meet these criteria, they are in a extremely good position at the moment. But then there will be new things coming. There are still technologies that you need to develop. There's still new business models you need to create for yourself to meet the future needs. And the point there is that you have to be on the move all the time. But it's very difficult, and it's very demanding to be the front runner companies, because we all Finnish companies, they are playing in global arena, and they sort of have to adjust all the time their own actions to what's happening in other countries. So it's very difficult field to play, but it's important that you are on the move.
Thank you. And I have a bit of a small follow-up for Anna-Reetta. So you mentioned some of the industry differences that, when it comes to steel, for instance, that's a relatively dirty industry, yet it's also, in terms of carbon emissions, yet it's also technologically difficult to change. And so here we seem to have this really pressing need to be able to drive down the emissions from that industry as a whole, yet we don't have the technology available for it. So do we just ignore it and give those businesses a pass, even though they are contributing to a very pressing sustainability issue? What should we expect of them?
Well, I could talk about steel for a longer time, but maybe I'm not doing it at this point of time. But the fact is that actually the lead Nordic player, for example, is as close to theoretical minimum of carbon emissions than it's possible. So we are really on the limits with the current technology. But of course, it's sure that the pressure from stakeholders and of course from the businesses inside has grown tremendously over the past times, and all serious players in that industry of course invest a lot in trying to find the next the new solutions, whatever they then are, new technologies of different kinds of carbon capture models and whatnot you have. At the same time, I think this is a perfect example of the many tensions in this question, because at the same time, it has been calculated that the world will need so-called virgin steel, i.e. new steel into the system, so that we can build the necessary other devices that we need, amongst others, to meet the climate targets. We need machines, wind towers, of course new materials are also emerging for many applications, but you see that's really the balance. We need steel, but at the same time we should minimize the climate issues of it.
Thank you. It's not an easy balancing act. I had another follow-up for Ulla. You were mentioning that there's these constantly changing sustainability imperatives. So biodiversity comes up or something new comes up. And, we've already talked about the fact that it's very difficult to reorient a ship, and especially a big ship. And is there should companies be trying to chase every one of these sustainability issues? Should they be trying to, be cutting edge when it comes to biodiversity conservation? Because that's costly, and then maybe some actions you take to go that direction are opposed to actions you would take for the next issue that comes up. So how do we balance that, right? It seems rather challenging.
It is rather challenging, and I would say that's a tricky part. But it's about if sustainability is part of the strategy. So it's about the strategic thinking. What are the scenarios what could happen? What are the emerging issues? And sustainability should be one topic there. There could be something, or there are other disruptors as well. But the sustainability should be there. And then based on that, you always make your strategy, for instance. It's the same thing here with the sustainability. You have to look what is coming, what are the next relevant things. Mm-hmm. Then you have to understand that what is material for you, what is your industry, what is your company, what kind of capabilities, skills you have, what is kind of core of your business, and how it will impact. And then you start to think about the path, that what are the emerging things and how to react on them. I would say that you cannot separate sustainability from the. If you think about sustainable business, it's a part of the future and part of the strategy, and then also the issues that comes there. And then in the points when you are there and you're planning, of course, then you have to make these decisions that where the focus, and sometimes it's not the right one, and then you just need to adjust it. But I would say that this kind of scenario thinking also helps, and that you are really, and you are understanding also the stakeholder opinions and the coming legislation, and following this discussion, and then reacting or proactively developing the issues through that.
Thank you.
But it's not an easy thing.
No, definitely not. You got to be pragmatic about it. And then sort of tying some of that into something that Riikka, you mentioned in your opening comments related to this skills gap. So Ulla just mentioned that it can be very difficult to understand these scenarios and where things are going and how a company should be reoriented. And so having people who are able to think within these new strategic bounds would seem to be important. But you've mentioned there's this skills gap at play. So would you mind expanding on that to sort of help us understand, like, maybe we would have to make fewer trade-offs if we could just do things better, and how can that happen?
Perhaps first thing about the skills gap, it's probably a general issue in Finland. It's not only related to sustainability, but it's relevant in the terms of sustainability as well. Because many of our companies, we know what's happening in Finland. There are less and less children born in Finland. We are fewer and fewer all the time, and it seems to be very, very difficult for us to get foreigners into our country. Thank you, Patrick, for being here. It's simply a situation where there are many megatrends that are becoming reality in business. I mean, we have barely succeeded in finding enough digital skills to our companies, and now there is this need to become carbon neutral. So you should have people who can lead the change or make the change from these two different kinds of views. And we all know that it's no longer true that you get one education early in your career and then you can sort of continue throughout your working life with that knowledge that you got at the university when you got your first degree. So there's an issue that companies are talking about reskilling and upskilling. Your dean mentioned life-wide learning. So these are the issues that companies are facing at the moment. And then when these kind of megatrends are really affecting the business, then it should also be looked in education providing organizations. What are they teaching actually? So what does the degrees look like? What do they look like at university level? What do they look at different levels? And we are talking about a big transition, so we should have a look at this at every step. Let's take our chemical industry as one example. So you were earlier talking about different industries. It's this kind of transitions are also pretty much linked to the cycle in which they make their new investments, because that's the point when you can actually introduce new technologies. You can really make big changes. They have their timing. And when that time comes, if you don't have enough people to do that transition at that point, then it's too late. Then you have to wait for this next phase when you do these kind of investments. And I fear that quite many of our industries have been considered as old industries, and they probably haven't been so locking for students in order to be to specialize in your studies into those directions. So this is the kind of a situation where business life is actually living at the moment in Finland. So there are many different aspects that we are lacking at the moment.
Thank you. And we could certainly continue speaking about that for a very long time, any of these topics. So thank you again to everybody. But we are also getting towards the end of our allotted time. And so there was 2 questions I wanted to pick up from the audience. Basically, and hopefully we can just get your quick fire thoughts on these. So the first one is just, what's the role of company values in making choices between different options? So in choosing how to balance these sustainability and practical matters, how do company values matter in there? If anybody would like to comment briefly on that one.
I would like to comment that about the strategy and the values that's kind of understand the core business and the core values of the company, what is relevant and how they can react to the whatever the need for the transformation in that industry or that company is.
Okay, thank you. Any other brief thoughts on that one?
I agree with Ulla.
Perfect. So I guess from sort of the take-home message is ensuring that, if we want companies to pay attention to sustainability and consider these hard realities, it does need to be integrated into your values. You can't just hope it's going to happen. And then the second question was asking about, many studies of the market are showing consumers are more interested in sustainable products, which is definitely true. But then this comment's also making the point about, well, that doesn't seem to be getting reflected in company revenues going up. And why might there be any, why might that disconnect exist?
I will, from the perspective I've seen, I think there is increasingly many and really many businesses. Most start to understand that in order to keep customers coming to you, you really need to understand the sustainability needs and reflect those in your business. This goes even back to the former example of steel. There is really a strong competition on who is the one to succeed in producing the new kind of steel, and certainly there will be clients for that kind of products. And the same applies to many other industrial offers as well. And of course, it's very visible in the consumer products. But of course, it takes time, and there are different industries, different approaches.
Okay.
May I add here that there's a pressure coming from the customer side, but then there is also pressure coming from the financing side. If a company realizes that we are not going to get financed unless we are taking sustainability seriously, then it's quite strong message. And you have to take that into account, and you have to adopt your strategy so that you actually can meet that challenge.
Okay.
If I may build on that, and thank you, Riikka, for building up, taking up the capital market perspective. Increasingly, it's in the financing, and it's also in the equities side. It's the power of sustainable investing is just huge.
Definitely. And this sort of leads us to a situation where we might not necessarily see sustainability actions improving revenue, but it's like it's no longer enough. Sustainability alone doesn't get you a competitive advantage. It's like societal expectations have changed in a way that you have to be sustainable to a certain degree simply to not be at a competitive disadvantage, because broad sectors of society are coming to expect these things, whether it's in capital markets, whether it's on the consumer side or whatnot. But again, me noting the time here, we're at 6 o'clock, and I don't want to be keeping people from their holiday weekends or their Easter weekends. So I'm just going to mention two things, and I'll end with a thank you to the panelists. So one of them is, as part of signing up for this, you would have received a feedback form as a viewer or an audience member. Please do fill that out. We'd love to know what you thought about this, or if you've got any thoughts or comments on the content of this session in general. The second thing is, I guess, more from a personal side for me. As I mentioned, I'm in charge of developing the strategic management in a changing world program, where sustainability is a big part, and we're trying to help students take a pragmatic view. So to any of the audience members who would like to learn more about that, or can possibly let me know what you or your companies or your industries are looking for from graduates to understand, please do reach out. My email, you can find that. It's my first name, my last name at aalto.fi. So but then on to the most important thing. I would just like to say thank you to our three panelists. Thanks for making the time to be with us today, and for bringing your diverse viewpoints here. Hopefully we've helped the audience to understand the subject a little more fully, even though an hour is by far not enough to do the topic justice, as it's very complex. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it.